If I were totally honest with you, the reason that I'm giving this presentation, I should actually be giving the presentation of different ways I have screwed up projects in the past, but didn't realize it until later when I found out how projects actually should or could happen. I have been with Creighton just shy of 2 years now, and when you go into an interview and they greet you with a project that they want you to approach and you haven't even been hired yet, you know that something it will be coming your way. So that little project was that Creighton was interested in replacing their ILS, Integrated Library System. And as I'm getting used to Creighton, and I'm getting to meet people, and I'm meeting with staff individually, it was a great time to learn about the culture, about what they liked about the system, what they hated about their ILS, and just get to know what I was kind of in for. And what I learned by listening is that each person had something that they wanted to address. And as we were looking at my project, it seemed like changing out the ILS was going to take on each one of these chunks. So I continue to meet with people, and as I'm trying to figure out who did what and how everything fit together, one thing that became very clear through conversations with Heather is that this wasn't just going to be a task list like I had approached projects before. We were going to have to really work to integrate the project, the thing that we wanted to change that would involve tasks, with change management. How we were going to get such a diverse climate, such as Creighton with 3 separate libraries, all on the same page for the same project. So, our premise through that is that instead of just replacing or transitioning from what we had into something new that hopefully we liked better, our goal was really to transform the whole way, address everything, why we did things, how we did things, and look at everything fresh. We've been on our system for over 14 years. A lot of the decisions that we were carrying forward, a lot of our policies, those decisions were 14 years old. Well, just think of how much has changed then. Some of those decisions were actually invalid or should be looked at again to make sure that they meet our current students with their current technology and definitely into the future.
And I think the thing that's important is that we've tried to educate staff at all levels that this is a transformation, that we're looking at something totally new, and so we've tried to be transparent and communicate well with staff, and instead of just throwing out lots of jargon, explain what that jargon is so that we can get from the pretzel to the end fist.
And this is the fist of celebration. This is not the fist of conflict.
And get there with people ready to start a new system. I mean, just because some of us have been there for so long, we're ready for a new one, but we have enough new people. There's been enough changes in the industry that we've had to do some education of everybody as to what those changes are. So that's been sort of the important human factor, is not just giving them a new ILS, but teaching them what it means for them.
So starting off with a few definitions. A project, when I have done a lot of things that I have called projects, which really were just new job assignments. A project actually is something that would not normally fit into your workflow. It's a series of tasks it's directed toward a goal, and it has a reasonable length to it. If this is something that you will be doing forever, it's not a project. Okay. If it has one task assigned with it, it's not really a project. This is a little bit more comprehensive, but it gives us a foundation of what a project is. Now, some projects may be very short-lived. The project that this ILS migration, we actually have a 3-year time period. So whether that's considered reasonable length, to me kind of skirts that. But we'll get a little bit more into that later. So project management needs to address these factors. The project needs to have a definite scope of work. So you need to determine what is going to be part of this project. Because one of the major components or headaches of project is called scope creep. When someone finds out that you're doing X and they want to attach something else to it, that's why it's important to definitely define your scope. This is what we're doing. We're not doing this. Okay? And this comes in really handy when people are trying to understand it. They may throw much more into your project than what you're really addressing. So define. It has a definite scope. It meets a specific objective. It's even better if it supports a strategic plan, but it does have a specific objective, a defined beginning and an end. Love the ending.
Well, and that's really important for staff because when you're doing a project, you're asking people to take on extra work on top of their normal, which is really hard to do for some staff. I mean, they're having to reprioritize. But if you can tell them by June 30th, 2016, we'll be on a new ILS, it gives them a goal to think about. It gives them an ending date. It kind of helps with, that sometimes that feeling that a project goes on forever. So if you need to give them an end date. Now it can be flexible, but it gives, again, it's that sort of goal-oriented aspect.
Project management will also identify resources. You need to know how much time this is going to take and cost. And everyone's time and cost, not just yours, not just your teams, the trainers, other people on campus that might have to get pulled in. If you're working with students, are they going to need, what kind of training are they going to need on the new system so that they can understand what you're transitioning to? So it's time as in calendar time, and it's hourly time, and definitely cost. And then your stakeholders, identify them and then utilize them. That's also a critical part of project management. And this always includes more people than you think. This was one of my feelings in my earlier projects. It's because I do tech, so someone would buy something, want me to stand it up, and so I would learn about it, I would stand it up, and then I teach them how to use it. Well, I wasn't involving the stakeholders. I knew by doing this, reference was going to need to know how to use it in the end, but I didn't involve them. Some things will involve entirely different departments. In our current situation, probably the department that is most excited about our project is purchasing. And we get more feedback, and I'm dealing with them all the time because they want to make this huge change. And whoever would have thought that purchasing would have been one of our stakeholders. But you need to look at it with a very broad scope. The project manager. Now, when I was doing my presentation, I wasn't necessarily having a very good day. And so I thought of bouncy balls. And I have a whole box and you can take some when you go. But sometimes as a project manager, you kind of see it as the person who's trying to juggle, keep all the balls in the air. And on bad days, you're just trying to keep them off the floor. But I really like the image of a bouncy ball, and I can't do it here because I've tried and it will just sink into the carpet. But the thing that makes bouncy balls so much fun is that it's focused energy. And that's what a project manager really does. It helps people to focus their energy for a desired effect. If I'm having fun with a bouncy ball, I can throw up my box of bouncy balls and they can go all over and that'll be exciting for a little bit, but it won't accomplish my goal. But if I bounce it with an intense or a focused energy, it's going to spring back with the energy, the result, the enthusiasm that I'm wanting. So as part of that, the project manager has to do a lot of different things. I was worried about the yellow on my thing, so my whole presentation was just made because you can see my visual. But these are different things that the project manager really has to focus on. But I'm just going to mention 3. One of them is the vision. We have so many things to do, and a new project, while for some is very exciting, for others it's just one more thing. So as we're looking at as the project manager is looking at the vision, what you're trying to do is keep people focused. Let them know that what they're doing has a meaning. This is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. Because when discouragement comes in, or conflict, or confusion, or project creep, you can always refocus and just say, hey, this is why we're doing it, and this is how we're going to do it. The other thing that I have gotten better at is facilitator. There are some projects where it's very natural for the project manager to be the lead. And then there is a project that I'm working on right now where I just bring in the key people and I facilitate conversations. And I ask them tough questions, and they try to make my brain explode, and that's really one of their goals. We've actually ended meetings because I was close on occasion. But I have them answer the tough questions. I do not have the expertise in what we're exploring with electronic resource management to be able to be the lead. But as the project manager, I'm the one who starts the discussions, follows up, assigns the action items, and makes sure it keeps going. And then micro details. I've always thought that I was kind of type A and just very detail oriented. Until I got on the ILS project, which is massive. So when I went to my training workshop on project management, I discovered that while I thought I was driving my committee crazy by breaking everything into small parts, it actually wasn't even small enough. So get the ability to take something and actually divide it into those tasks is very important or critical so that everyone knows what they're doing and doesn't get overwhelmed because you're trying to do things in chunks or you start doing things out of order. So, someone has given you a project, or you have decided that you want to take on a project. One of the things that before it's announced, before you start communicating it to anyone, really you need to focus in on the vision casting. Do your due diligence. Make sure that you understand or establish project objectives. Sometimes you're handed them. Other times, when you're building it yourself, you need to establish, okay, what are we going to do? Why are we going to do it? Know about possible solutions. You don't want to walk in and say, this is the solution, but you want to know enough about about possible solutions that you can bring in. Okay, this is either they're using this or this is out there, and be able to educate people so that you can set that vision. Again, know your stakeholders, and then acknowledge that what you're going to do is going to impact the stakeholders. Know that you are investing in their time, and you're going to take some of their time. They're going to have to change, and
change is not easy. So you have to bring people along, and that's where good communication and education. And sometimes when you start a project and you think you know all your stakeholders, as you start on your project and you start talking to those initial people, suddenly you're going to find out, oh wait, that person supervises someone else who actually does that. Maybe we should bring them into the conversation. And that's part of it as well. Is sometimes people will say, well, here's the project and here are the people involved. Well, it's like throwing a rock into a pond. Those ripples out. Because a lot of times you've got people working for you or people in different departments. One of our identifiers for stakeholders was our IT department on campus. What was going to be their role when we went to a new ILS and needed data interchange and things like that. So sometimes you don't see all of those stakeholders at the beginning. It's as you kind of get into a project, you learn, and then with a long-term project like ours, people come and go. So again, your stakeholders, and then you have to take that new stakeholder and get them up to speed.
So if you look at your project as real, and you're trying to set your vision for it, you really want to get people to start thinking in a different way, or see it as an opportunity to do things differently. Because some people are more interested in recreating what they have than to take a wider look at it and see it as an opportunity to do more. It's a wonderful time to analyze for strengths and weaknesses, and to do this in a way that's non-threatening. We are not looking to point to see who isn't doing X, because we have identified X as a problem. We just want to identify that X, we need to watch this in the new system. This isn't getting done now through 97,000 different ways that we don't care. But in the new system, we want to make sure that this part is covered. So as you're analyzing it and you're talking to people about your project, we have found that it's very critical to say, hey, it's not about you. It's not even about your job. It's about the process. It's about how we're going to take and accomplish the task and hit our goal in the end. And then just to take the opportunity to transform what we do, how we do it, and why we're doing it. Because a lot of people are doing things and they don't really see how it fits together, or in our case, how it affects someone else. Because having 3 libraries and then having basically each library having 3 main sections in it, people were doing things in their category and not realizing that the impact was actually affecting others. An example is a change by the Tech Services Committee. It ends up impacting reference and ultimately circulation, who acts as a backup for reference, or the systems person would make a change in an interface, and then that wasn't communicated across everything. So really, we took this opportunity to even say, okay, here are our stakeholders, and this is how we are functioning. This is how we want to function. And so we actually ended up creating new committees. We are in the process of building processes so that people are talking and communicating better, so that the end result will be better for everyone involved. An example would be with collection development. These people would buy it, and these people would stand it up. And then someone else would usually catalog it. Well, if you get the people who are evaluating it, talking to the people who are eventually going to catalog it, then the keywords or the subject headings or the way that it's implemented could be entirely different if you actually knew how it was intended to be used or what it was going to support. So this is the kind of thing that we're trying to address through that vision. It's different than, okay, we're just going to make this thing work because that's what we do, and we're going to put a catalog record in it and then connect to it here. We're trying to make sure that the big picture is this going to make sense in the end for our students? Are they going to be able to get to it in the best way possible?
So just a question then, did you kind of repurpose your committees with different people or?
Mm-hmm. Some of them, yeah. The Tech Services Committee has pretty much stayed the same. It's everyone who's in all three tech services. But we have a new committee called the User Experience, and it's a makeup of public and reference and ILL. So different people have different representation on that committee. And actually, our cataloger, who's also a reference, sits on that committee. So in a sense, she's sitting on it as a reference person, but she can help them understand the back end. And then as they are kind of talking about the user experience, when they have questions that are really related to how the back end works, whether it's the cataloging, acquisitions, etc., the committee chairs are talking about that. And then there's more communication between those committees. The CERT committee didn't really repurpose itself, but they kind of refocused. And again, we've kind of refocused on what's our end goal, and that's the student outcome. We're trying to also educate all staff that what we do is for the student outcome. You know, our students and faculty getting the research materials that they need. Because they don't care how they get there. They just need it. And so, you know,
They don't care what library's paying for it. They don't care. They just need it.
right. And so, you know, we're trying to get people thinking in those terms. So yeah, and we created one new committee because we have one committee that's sort of the planning committee that Becky is using as a main focus. But those people are going back to the committees that they belong to, going back to their library staffs and conveying and communicating and getting questions and feedback. So there's a lot of back and forth. And I would expect that as we get into this project, we'll create short-term committees for training, implementation, migration.
Definitely. And that was one of the things that we had to discuss when we were setting the vision, is that as we were addressing structure, it was like, okay, these are the committees that we're going to start with now. But when we get to here, we're going to reevaluate everything and make sure that everything's being addressed. And do we need to add additional committees, or do we need to refocus different committees? We actually put a stop in our plan of, this is when we look at it again, which was very calming for people.
Again, it's that beginning and ending kind of thing of, you know, where we're at.
Yeah, if I don't like it, I'm not stuck with it forever, kind of a thing. And I skipped a slide, but with innovation, moving from vision to innovation, it's really important to focus on not what is, but what we're headed to. Because a lot of time and energy can be wasted or spent or exhausted talking about why things did happen, or different personalities of people who have retired or moved on, and that doesn't really take you anywhere. But it is a great place to drop the baggage that happened 14 years ago in the last migration, and to drop some of the baggage now of, well, so-and-so didn't end it. We can't fix it. We might as well not even acknowledge it, but we can set our goals on the target. And so that has helped with the innovation. To get very much more practical, once you've thought about the vision part of it, you need to establish a project charter. And these are the segments that really need to be in it. Vision, for me, the vision segment helped make everything make sense, or the project makes sense in my own mind. When I got to the project charter, that was the time where I had to prepare this in my stakeholders' viewpoint. How am I going to explain this to the staff? How am I going to explain it to administration? How am I going to explain it to administration's bosses who don't know anything about NILS? But they're going to have very definite questions, and they want to know that a lot of thought and planning has gone into it. Because if they don't see this, they are going to assume that you did not do any of the thought, the vision, and all of that work. So this is how you can name it down. Obviously, it needs a name, and I would say make the name descriptive so anyone can figure out what it is. And then be consistent with it. The changing the name on it is going to get some people thinking on a different project. They just won't all be on the same page. Then it needs to very clearly define what is in scope and what's out of scope. And if you keep in mind the climate that you're in, if you know that there's a pet project or a pet issue or something on campus that you want to make sure that your project is not associated with, then be very clear. This is not a replacement for X, Y, Z that you know that someone else is working on. Be very clear with your scope. Define your success and make it measurable so that in the end, everyone knows that this went well. Not just because it's done, but because we actually hit the targets. And again, those who are looking at it from that strategic planning standpoint, this is where they're going to live. And so we want to be able to address those criteria. Your requirements, this is how we approached it with what do we have to have, what do we want to have, and what do we want to avoid at all costs. And so that's where we put that information in. It seemed kind of odd at the time, but when we got to the point where we sent out our project to RFI, all of this was determined. All we had to do is go to our project document, drop it into our RFI, and we were eons ahead of other things. And then internal and external customers were identified, and we've talked about them a lot. So, things that kind of surprised me as I was starting, because I had usually worked in my own little office and done projects before and told people what they were going to do. When I started working with the team, concerns for people were really about establishing the authority and the reporting structure. That really needs to be in your project document, because that's going to be one of your questions. Okay, how do I get input? Who's in charge? Yeah, those are going to be big questions. Form a team and a participation structure. By that, I mean when we pulled our team together, at first there wasn't a consensus that that team wanted to make decisions. They really wanted to be communication pieces, which was not what I had intended. So it took me a little bit, but then I figured out that we were not decision makers, we would make recommendations that would go to the decision makers, and participation and willingness to do it skyrocketed. So you really need to figure out the group that you're in and what they're willing to do and what you need to do, and try to find that compromise. The feedback structure. You always want feedback, and you usually want it from different levels. How were we going to do that? We were definitely committee-based, and we had our lead committee, then we had our subcommittees, and we had chairs and all of this. But we wanted to make sure, because some committees were all-inclusive, some were exclusive, how could anyone get feedback? And then to whom would they get it, and how would they bring it back to the team? Because you don't want to spend all of your time with everyone running to you. I was thinking of my own personal time, dealing with all that input. I wanted it screened by the committee chairs. Again, define a decision-making process, and then definitely include those milestones and schedule, because you will have your people who want to make sure that we're moving forward, that we're hitting our goals, and they just want that idea that this will be done. And so it also is very nice when you're giving reports back to your administrators to say, hey, we've knocked these things off. And so what I have a tendency to do is to display that and then highlight in red crossout where we've been on the list.
And I think for people on not only the lead team, but for others on the other committees, to be able to make that little check mark against a milestone, you know, it's a little form of celebration to say, okay, we got through that part. Now we can work and focus on the next part. You know, and again, it's those little things that I think help keep staff involved and keep them sort of going, especially when you have a long-term project. Shorter-term projects, not as much. But I am a list maker, and when I can cross off or tick off something off my list, I definitely feel better. And I know there are people that say list makers aren't organized or whatever, but I do much better when I have a list. And so it's always helpful for me also when Becky has our agendas and she can say, we've hit this milestone. Yay, we've accomplished something, and it's a sense of accomplishment that helps kind of keep you going through it.
Especially if you're in an environment that's had a lot of false starts. That aspect of it is really important, because you can, one of the comments I get is we've never gotten this far before. And so just the fact that you can prove that you're breaking through barriers and hurdles can add to your momentum. A project charter should definitely ask these questions, because if you can think of this is what your upper administration is going to be looking at. They don't care really about daily workflows or all of that. They're going to ask these questions. Why? What happens if we don't do it? You know, because if budgets are tight and they're looking for a reason, you better have, you know, a good justification on what will happen if we don't do it. For us, our contract expires on June 30 of 16, and then we're unsupported. So communicating that to people that can or may flow into the why now. How critical will the impact be? Critical can be different ways. If we're going to have 2 systems up for a period of time, that's going to be a critical factor. If we're going to be totally down for a period of time, or just the fact that, hey, through this migration, our ultimate goal is to be able to measure student outcomes. What strategic planner doesn't want to hear that? So you need to include that. Address your change and your risk management, how we can avoid failure. We're going to talk about failure a little bit later. Outline the project steps and stages. So again, that's just another way of picking up that scope and being able to measure. And then at the end, can the reader clearly tell what the project is and is not about? So that's the time you take your project charter, you walk over to someone who hasn't been involved and ask them to read it and start asking 20 questions and see if they get it. Or if they don't understand something, go back and include it so that you're ready for all of the justifications you're going to have to do continuously with with any project. Because when you finally get to this stage and you take it to your staff, even though you might have done prep and hey, we're going to do this and hey, this is going to be great and we're going to change the world and everything's going to be great. These were the things that came up and hit me in the face. Even though I felt like we had a good spirit and a good cooperation commitment to it, one of the first things I was asked is, by whose authority are you doing this? And you can take that kind of as, make me change. Or just a case of, people have signed off on this, right? This isn't your crazy idea. So you can take it a number of different ways, but that was one of the first things I got hit with, was I gave my whole spiel, this is what we're gonna do, and it's like, yeah. And maybe it was because I was new, or mouthy, one of the two, but, and then they wanted to know the decision-making structure, which was, we had already taken care of it, but we needed to make sure we communicated it to it, because they wanted to know at what point they could either stop it, or stop something that they didn't like, or who was going to actually make some choices that they may not like. So we communicated that, and that's why our thing is so elaborate with feedback, because we were thinking about change management and specific personalities and trying to address that so that they have the outlet for their opinions, for their concerns, and then they're not always uptight or bouncing all around.
And it helps to be able to address those concerns as you go along, because the last thing you want to deal with at the end of it is people sort of digging in their heels going, well, I didn't have a say in this process, why should I do this? But if we can educate and help people with this change throughout the project, then I think we have less of that, angst about where we're going, and less of the, I've always done it this way and I'm going to continue to do it this way, whether the system will let me do it this way or not.
Well, and with the vision, the project manager, when they're getting some of this back, I don't want to do it that way, that's not the way that we have to do it, you bring back the vision. Okay, our goal is to create a system that represents 3 libraries well, and that we have consolidated practices, we have best practices. How does what you say support that? Because this is what we're aiming for, and you have a concern and I want to hear it, but your concern has to support the end goal. And sometimes that deflects it, or at least it gets them thinking in a different way, and it's like, okay.
And it gets them thinking in a forward future, because so many times we get stuck in, I've always done it this way. I mean, I can tell I do it myself, but when I'm challenged with, well, what's a new way that you might be able to do this, I think that sort of helps with some of it.
And then number 1 question is, will this actually happen, or are we wasting our time again? And all you can do is start pointing to milestones and promises and the fact that we're staying on top of this, we're doing everything we can. Ultimately, it will be our president. Ultimately, it will be. He can do anything he wants at any time, but we are doing what we can to make sure that this will happen. Okay. All right. So this is just, and these will be loaded online. This is what ours looks like, our project description, our success criteria, some of our requirements, and I just wanted to include those. When we get to integration, this is the time, a million details. Break everything into steps, know the relationships between the steps. So if something has to happen, A has to happen and B needs to happen, but at A.2, that's when B needs to, just know the relationships. break the steps into micro goals. So we need to do this, but then make sure that there's action items and there's deadlines with everything. Because at any point, if someone isn't moving forward, then the whole project can stall. And then delegate or share responsibility with ownership. When I started this project, it was on me, and then I had my friends helping me. Okay, they were my team, and I made them be friends. But it was on me, and it didn't take long to realize that if the project was going to be successful, it was not about me. It was not about the project. It was about the collaboration and the teamwork and the ownership. And when we have a problem, and I'm standing in front of the room and we're just stuck, the question that I always have to answer is, what is the next decision? Because there's a million things that we can address, and sometimes that's just terrifying. But what is the next decision, and who needs to make it? And that's what we'll address next. That's the thing that has to be done. We're just going to take this one step. And then once we get into that one step, then the momentum will kick in, and you forget about the 18 million steps you just outlined, and you're just concerned about moving forward and doing the one.
One step at a time.
With integration, you're always making sure that things are being moving forward and that things are on scope. And I love now to say things are out of scope. I actually had a big poster in my office, and people would come to me with things that will eventually impact the migration, but for right now, we had a different name for it, which wasn't appropriate. So I renamed the sheet tangents. So these will have to be addressed, but they're not part of our scope, but we can't lose them either. So always be monitoring your scope. Communicate. You cannot communicate too much. And remember that people have different learning styles. So print is great for some people, other people need to hear it, other people need to see it in the presentations. Make sure that you're hitting it a number of different ways. And then when I get discouraged, because you'll tell someone or talk about something multiple times, and then it's suddenly brand new. And you're just kind of standing there. I forget that no one has attended more meetings on this than I have. So they really just don't know. They can't read my mind. So obviously I'm not communicating everything that they need to know. And this is true. Most likely they have not been following the project with the same level of interest that you have in it. So just keep those in mind. It's not that they are bad, it's just that the communication is a challenge. And you don't want to get so stuck into these things that may be a negative that someone never gets to their aha moment where they finally get the project and they're excited about it. So that's why the communication can be so important.
And the other thing about this is, obviously we're dealing with 3 diverse staffs, and we're all meeting, not as much as Becky, and I would not want Becky's meeting schedule. But a lot of times people are very focused on what's the impact on their position. And so what can be helpful with the project team is to sort of educate them on how what impacts them also impacts everyone else, and kind of give them that glimpse into the bigger picture. And I think that kind of helps with getting people to think outside the box and think about, well, we could be doing it this way, but if we do it this way, it affects these people and these people and these people. So, and rely on your team. You've chosen people who are stakeholders or major stakeholders. Well, talk to them about the other stakeholders and what are their learning styles. They probably know the people better than maybe the project leader, and you can help with that communication.
I did not include much about project management tools, except I just want to point out that they are your friend They are not your superhero. And the best advice that I got from my new supervisor, who came on about a year after I'd been working on this, was don't be consumed by your project management tool, because the project manager's life can totally become just making the tool do everything that you want. So you have all of your steps outlined, and then you have all of your Gantt charts, and then you can export your Gantt chart, and it can just be this obsession. So she actually encouraged me to, I have a very nice, professional, high, expensive one. She said, pick 2 areas of it and limit yourself. Some people can totally manage a complex project with Excel. So even though there's some free stuff out there, and I could send you a list if you're interested, just remember, it's your friend, it's not your superhero. Some people are afraid of failure, and these are some things that can add to failure. I like to consider failure as a learning opportunity or a refocus opportunity, and so failure to me is just part of the process, and I actually want it to happen because that means we're taking a look at it. We're not just accepting it. So these are some things that can add to failure and will need to be continually assessed to make sure that they aren't dragging your project down. Here are a few more. This last one is hitting our current project. It's the middle of the stinking semester and we are tired, but we gotta keep moving. We need to rechannel some interest. So just monitor your project. Fatigue. For assessment, everyone can read and we're almost out of time. But the after action review, I think, is the most important thing on this page because that is continuous. You do something, you take a look at it. What worked well, what didn't work well. We brought our vendors in for project demos. And we had one vendor that approached everything at what I called the egghead level. Everything was very, very broad. I loved it. I learned tons. The next vendor came in and everything was micro details. So then when we tried to use our evaluations between the egghead and the micro details, we were comparing cucumbers and apples. I mean, it just didn't work. Well, in looking at that, we were talking about it afterwards. The committee and the project manager did not give the vendors strong enough requirements for the presentations. My goal was to not grade them on the presentation, but the content of the presentation, but we totally missed our target. So then, instead of just saying, oh, we screwed that up, what are we gonna? It led to, how are we going to fix this? We still need that information so that we can make a determination. So our failure became a way to reassess, and actually I think some of our solutions are much better than just the same day presentation anyway, through our follow-ups. So, but that is very important. And celebrate your victories. I mean, there are times I walk in just with chocolate because, we got something done. We're moving forward.
We hit a milestone.
I need chocolate.
It's those little, well, I always need chocolate, so hence the bag that will start to pass around. But it's the little victories that also help carry your staff through that are involved, your stakeholders, and it's those little things that can help with some of that project fatigue, especially with big long-term projects. I mean, I felt it myself, and now because we've had some milestones, we've done some more action items. I'm feeling more energy about this project. Okay, we can get to the next step, and then when we get to that next step, and then by June 30th, 2015.
Where I keep reminding them, don't take it personally because we will be evaluating everything. Because there's nothing that will be unaffected by the change that we're making. Because we're actually opting for a unified resource manager, so it's like cleaning house or cleaning a junk drawer and getting rid of all of the technology. So since everything is going to be affected, it's the beautiful time to take a look at how and why we do it.
And we're trying to educate staff that this is the time now to talk about our processes and procedures and what this change means for us, and to work on it so that come July 1, we aren't all going, why did we do this? So it's a lot of communication and a lot of education, and it's understanding that your stakeholders are an important part of your project management, and so it's a back and forth, it's a coordination.
And that's why I actually like this graphic, because I have a tendency to focus in on the tech, but basically it's the people who are supporting the tech and supporting the project, and the two are so intimately connected that the success comes from making sure that they can support it and that they're involved and they feel like they own it. I just have a couple more slides. I do have a reference list. Some of them are just for my cool photos, but we did check. Jennifer Venipal is, I went to her half-day workshop, and then she's also published on this topic. I totally recommend her, both as a presenter or workshop leader, and her article. And if you have any questions, since I'm taking you to the max, please feel free to contact either Heather or I. And I really do have a box of bouncy balls, so if you'd like some. So sometimes my keyboard is just covered with junk, but sometimes just having something like this close reminds me, for me, this would remind me, okay, let's focus my energy. So if you would like them, they're up here.
Any other? Hey, Angela. Questions?